So after months and months of theorizing, we finally have some confirmation of sorts that the next iPad Pro should be launching as soon as March 2021. Now, of course, if you've been on this channel for a while, you might know that is really not a surprise because I predicted that Apple would launch the iPad Pro refresh in March, and now we have confirmation from one of the most reliable Apple leakers. But anywho, there will be a bunch of people thinking about what this next iPad Pro refresh will bring to the table, and so today I thought I'd just collate all the leaks, all the rumors, all the expectations and theories I have about this big iPad Pro refresh happening in just a few months. And so, without further ado, make sure to like and subscribe, click that notification for the latest Apple news and rumors, and with that being said, let's just tuck in. So first, I want to address the release date. Now, I did say March, but of course, specifically, what date could this be? Well, the rumors are all pointing towards a March 16th virtual event happening very soon, and so it is pretty much to be expected that we see this iPad Pro refresh at that event. And then if we take a look at Apple's past announcements with iPads, they usually release them to the public within a week of the announcement. So expect 16th to be the announcement date and then 23rd to be the eventual release date to the public. Now, interestingly, there is actually some information from Digitimes that this iPad Pro was actually supposed to release at the end of 2020. So essentially, Digitimes has connections with the supply chain, and basically, they're going to be using displays made by Samsung. They're going to be a 12.9-inch mini LED backlit LCD display, and apparently, there's been some delay in large volume shipments of these displays because, of course, the pandemic has pretty much ruined everything, and so the initial plan was to release these iPads by the end of 2020, but because of all of this, they've been delayed up until now because apparently they couldn't get the product certification in time. This information is quite interesting because it now begs the question, were other products that had mini LED also delayed because of this issue? Because we've heard from Min Chi Kuo and other sources that Apple's planning to go big on mini LED with their next iPad and MacBook refreshes, and so could we have seen other products at the end of 2020 if there wasn't this whole COVID mess? Either way, I'm very, very glad that Apple's finally managed to actually get hold of these shipments and get these into production. Another really interesting thing to note about this whole rumor cycle regarding this iPad Pro is the clear absence of the 11-inch model. In fact, John Prosser tells us that this model was supposed to be the 12.9-inch 5G iPad Pro that we should have seen at the end of 2020, much like Digitime also claims. And John tells us in that report that this 5G A14X iPad Pro will only be the 12.9-inch version. The 11-inch will stay the same, or possibly it could be killed off. I've made a video on this, so check it out in the icon above. But essentially, I think there is a possibility that we could see the 11-inch discontinued, or another possibility is that maybe Apple's planning to refresh the 11-inch version at the end of the year. Because let me remind you, iPad Pros have been refreshed every 18 months in the past. For example, we saw the original 2018 iPad Pro in October, and then we saw the 2020 iPad Pros in March, and we saw the 2017 versions of the iPad Pro, I believe, in June, I think. So yeah, 18 months roughly between each cycle, and so this is very much ahead of the curve. And so I think that maybe we could see the 11-inch version debut at the usual slot, which would be October 2021. So yes, keep in mind, the 12.9-inch iPad Pro is the only refresh we're seeing in March. The 11-inch could be refreshed later, or it could be killed off. Anyways, with that being said, let's now delve into the design, and this is going to be pretty brief because basically there is no change in the design. So the iPad Pro has pretty much peaked in terms of design. I think a lot of people are fine with how the iPad Pro looks. And of course, we're seeing Apple adopt this iPad Pro design to other lineups in their product range. For example, of course, we saw the iPhone 12s adopt the flat-edged iPad Pro design. The MacBooks should be seeing it very soon. The iMacs should be getting it too. So yes, clearly the iPad Pro is still a very modern design, and Apple really doesn't need to change it. So that's exactly what they're doing. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's now delve into the big feature, the big upgrade that I think a lot of you guys know about, and that is, of course, Mini LED. So to sum it up, Mini LED is based on the current LCD backlighting tech that we have in basically every iPad Pro, but it has some magical abilities where it can basically replicate the best parts of OLED. So the deep blacks, the high dynamic range, the great colors, all of that goodness of OLED coming to a display that's fundamentally still LCD. And that is a great thing because, of course, right now, Apple's having difficulties getting promotion on an OLED display without the LTPO technology. And yes, I know the iPhone 13s are apparently bringing it this year, but I'm not sure if Apple can bring it to a tablet, and so OLED is very much something that they can't do till much later. And so as a stopgap technology for Apple to maintain promotion and also give us some of the benefits of OLED, Mini LED does its job, and this should be a pretty massive change for the iPad. Now, of course, knowing Apple, they're not going to market this as Mini LED. They're probably going to have a fancy name for it. Personally, I think Liquid Retina XDR makes a lot of sense because we've got some leaks claiming that HDR should be coming to the iPad Pro. So throwing in the XDR word and of course including the Liquid name because of course it's still an LCD panel, that makes a lot of sense. And I think I can see Apple doing just that. The next thing on the list is of course something we come to expect with pretty much every iPad Pro refresh, and that is the chip. So of course we have the A14, Apple slightly boosts it for the iPad, and so we have the A14X. So of course, since the M1 in the Macs are based on the A14 architecture, it is very likely the A14X could just be an M1 with a slightly different name. In fact, I am very sure Apple's just going to use the same chip and rebrand it slightly to, of course, the A14X. And of course, that could mean this could run Mac apps, which I'll get to in a little while. Anyways, another thing we come to expect with every version of the iPad Pro is, of course, additional RAM. So the 2018 version came with 4 gigs, the 2020 version came with 6 gigs, and so the next convenient step seems to be 8 gigs on this new 2021 model. And again, I think that just ties really well with Pro apps on the iPad. I think that would be perfect to launch with this bigger iPad Pro with Mini LED. And we've heard some reports from some sources that yes, Apple's been working on Xcode and Final Cut and Logic Pro for the iPad Pro for a while. And so I think it makes sense for them to launch it with this iPad with the additional performance of the A14X and more RAM. It's just a no-brainer. And much like we've seen with the M1 Max where they can run iPhone and iPad apps, I think it is also very possible that with the A14X and possible Xcode support, we could see the same on the iPad. So Mac apps could be a possibility with this new iPad Pro. Another feature that we can come to expect with this iPad Pro is 5G. 5G just got real on the iPad. So yes, as expected, Apple's pushing the 5G train on the iPad Pro, and I guess it makes sense because some people do like buying cellular iPads, and so having the additional capabilities of 5G on this iPad platform would be pretty neat. Now personally, since I never leave the house, that's not something that interests me, but I can see some people who do work on the go, this ability is something that's quite nice to have. Now in terms of price and storage, I would expect things to largely stay the same. I think 128 gigs will be the standard this year too, and the same $1,000 starting price for the 12.9 inch size, but there could be a possibility that we could see the 5G tax on the iPad, and so maybe the cellular version will go up in price by $50 to $100. So now we come to some wildcards that could happen, but ultimately seem quite unlikely. And that begins with a triple lens camera. So yes, I know some of you are going to wonder what's the point of having a triple lens system on an iPad? Well, that is a good question and I have no answer for it. I guess the Pro deserves having the best camera system, and so there is a possibility that we could see a camera upgrade with this next version of the iPad Pro. In fact, back in 2019 we had some pretty reliable CADs showing us an iPad Pro with a triple lens camera, and so I think it is very likely that maybe we could see this initially planned triple lens system on the iPad Pro for this 2021 refresh. Now again, like I said, I'm not sure if this really benefits the consumer. I mean, a lot of you guys aren't doing iPad photography, and if you are, I guess that is good news. But for the large majority of us, this isn't something that's a huge feature, and so I can see why Apple doesn't do this. Some other things that are borderline quite wishlisty, I guess, but some things I want to see with the next iPad Pro are thinner bezels, for example, because compared to the iPhone, the iPad has some pretty thick bezels that I would love to see if they can reduce, especially with this new mini LED tech. But because Apple launched something as substantial as the Magic Keyboard last year for the existing sizes that I'm assuming they're going to continue using in the near future, it seems unlikely to me that they're going to give us a smaller body or a bigger iPad anytime soon. Finally, I thought I'll end it with two more things. Number one, external monitor support needs to be improved on the iPad Pro. It doesn't scale properly and it looks very awkward, and so I'm hoping Apple fixes that with iPadOS 14 or maybe the next iPad Pro refresh. But also, number two, this is the smallest thing ever, but it pisses me off, okay? Fix the logo, Apple. Put the logo in a landscape orientation because most people use the iPad in landscape, and so it's time to put that logo landscape too. And also, while I'm talking about landscape, put the cameras in a landscape orientation too, because right now they're to the side and that's really weird during a Zoom call because you have to look to the side even though you should be looking straight on to the screen. So yes, please fix that, Apple. That would be absolutely amazing. But anyways, that was just me going on a tangent about possible features I would love to see. But tell me in the comments below, what would be your dream feature in a future iPad Pro? But anyways, with that being said, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. Click that bell notification for the latest Apple news and rumors. And with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya, peeps.